Hi everyone. Now, it is a good idea in a parliamentary democracy to have two houses of parliament. The lower house, the House of Commons in the UK, decides which party will be in government, so it's going to have a majority always or almost always voting for whatever the government wants. An upper house can have greater independence from the government and can vote against government proposals as it likes. Now, Parliament combined can act as a powerful check and balance against the government ministers. After all, the government is there to govern and Parliament is there to make laws. It doesn't make sense that Parliament simply does what it's told by ministers, as it usually does at the moment. That power to challenge and block legislation has to be very real. The government should have to persuade Parliament of the merits of a law rather than simply insist that it's passed. So a second chamber is a good thing, but Britain's second chamber is a joke, or it would be if the problems with it weren't so serious. So here's why we need a fully elected upper house to replace the Lords. The Lords is undemocratic, obviously. It fails the most basic principle test. There are also serious practical issues here as well. Being undemocratic means it is unaccountable and unrepresentative. Supporters of the Lords claim it is independent and full of expertise that you won't find in the Commons. Now, the reality is very different. So here's a quick look at our House of Lords as it is now. Firstly, it is huge. Around 800 people can now sit in the House of Lords. And I say can because a lot of them rarely turn up. That makes it the largest parliamentary chamber, second only to China's National People's Congress. Now, that's not surprising when you consider how Lords get there. They all get appointed for life, and every year the leaders of the parties represented in the Commons can nominate people to take seats in the Lords. So every year the size of the Lords increases unless more existing Lords die or retire than are appointed. The vast majority of Lords are political appointees. 26 of them are bishops of the Church of England and 92 are hereditary peers chosen from among the other hereditary peers to sit in the House. Once chosen, they are also there for life, and when they die, the hereditary peers of the same party choose another hereditary peer to take their place. At no point, of course, are the British public included in this process for deciding who gets a seat in the Lords. So the Church decides who its most senior bishops will be, and the party leaders choose who they want to put in the House. Now, research done by Unlock Democracy and the Electoral Reform Society and others shows that the appointment of peers has done little to improve the diversity of the Lords. Only 26% of Lords are women. Only 46 peers, about 5% of the total, are from black, Asian or other minority ethnic groups. Almost 20% are over the age of 80, 74% are over the age of 65. And more than a third of peers used to hold elected office, whether in Parliament, a devolved Parliament, or a local council.
They're important for good governance and good government. And that's what the House of Lords does. It's got brilliant expertise in being able to reform law.
So one of the most common defences I've ever heard for the Lords is the claim that it is full of expertise that you don't find in the Commons. But the Electoral Reform Society has shown that this simply isn't true. Now, as I mentioned, a third are former elected politicians, 7% are former political staffers. Lawyers make up 7%, people from business and commerce about 9%, banking and finance 6%. Two peers are former staff for the Royals, and only one peer out of that 800 previously worked in a manual trade. And the ERS research shows that the bulk of the work done by the Lords is done by about a third of all peers, and most of those are the political appointees. Of course, the House of Commons has plenty of MPs who have previously worked in other professions, including health, education and the law. And the obvious glaring problem with the expertise argument is that an expert is an expert in one thing. That's what makes them an expert. If Robert Winston, just seen in that clip, was appointed to the Lords because of his health background and his IVF research experience, why is he also voting on education, foreign affairs, climate change and everything else that comes to the Lords for scrutiny? And they aren't independent. By and large, Lords vote with their party when asked to do so. And the important point here is that it's not about expert opinion when you're passing law. You can get experts through committees, you can invite them in to give evidence and to inform your decisions, but parliaments are there to represent the interests of those who elected them. You know, we are supposed to, as voters, be represented in Parliament, and we are supposed to have an opportunity to choose who makes the laws that the rest of us have to live by. It's pretty straightforward. So it's the representation and the legitimacy which is important here. And the voters agree. 71% of the British public want the Lords replaced. Contrary to what the experts and politicians might tell you, replacing the Lords is not complicated or difficult. It's made complicated and difficult by those who want to slow down the process. The Commons can abolish the Lords without too much difficulty and introduce a new upper house. Proposals vary, but here are a few simple ways a new upper house will be better than the Lords. It will of course be smaller, with 650 MPs in the House of Commons. The upper house could be as small as 300 to 350. Being smaller means it's clearer who is doing what, why and how they got there, and how they can be removed at the ballot box. The distribution of seats for a smaller house would be different to those of the Commons, so even if both houses had the same voting system, different boundaries would ensure different votes and different outcomes. It's also shown in places like Australia that voters who aren't wedded to one party are happy to vote for different parties for each house. What would also alter the balance of seats is the term limit, the length of a parliamentary term. Now the Commons currently has a limit of 5 years before they have to have another election, which quite frankly is too long. 4 years makes more sense, so an 8-year term for the upper house, with half the house being up for election every 4 years, would ensure a different balance of seats while allowing more continuity and less pressure within the upper house from the electoral process. So every 4 years all 650 MPs and 150 of the 300 members of the upper house would face election. Now this works elsewhere. Most democracies have at least a majority of their upper house elected directly by the voters, with others indirectly elected and some appointed. Australia is my favourite example of fully elected parliament. They call their houses of parliament the House of Representatives and the Senate, but they mirror Westminster more than they do Washington. Yet the upper house, the Senate, is fully elected. The balance of seats in the two houses is usually quite different, and there are clear mechanisms for dealing with deadlock between the two houses when that happens. And it works, and in my opinion works pretty well. And the politics isn't always delivering what people want, but that's the politics and the political culture of Australia, not the constitution that's at fault when that happens. But let's get back to the basic principle, because in a democracy those making the laws we all have to live by must be representative, chosen by and accountable to all of us. An unelected quasi-feudal upper house has no place in a democratic society. It is bloated, corrupted, absurd, and at times beyond parody, which is why any demand for a republic must include a demand for a fully elected upper house. So that's it from me for now. Don't forget to head over to republic.org.uk where you can find out more about the issues, the campaign, and of course how you can get involved. Bye for now.